Welcome to the Sutherland Report yet again. Thank you very much for joining me. Now, of course, I say this every time, as someone else says, which is I'm extremely excited to bring on a dear friend and my guest today because it's one of my interests, of course, as you know, which is filmmaking, creativity. And it's not every day that we have a conversation with someone that knows quite a lot about that industry, TV, Hollywood, because they have worked within it and they have since they were a child. So here we go. I'm just going to bring on my friend, JP Sloane. JP, sir, how are you? I'm just gonna punch us forward.
That's fine. I'm blessed. How are you?
Okay. I'm good. I'm delighted that you are joining me today, and thank you so much. Because one of the things I always get excited about is because it's about people's stories. It's about their life experience, and what our prayer is that we are pointing people in the right direction, in the correct direction. But people can take encouragement through how God has used people in their lives, and that is what is really, really powerful. So I have got JP, I have got a number of pictures, but before we carry on, I showed a picture at the beginning which I'll quickly flash up again. I just wondered if you could kindly tell us who this lovely lady is.
This lovely lady was my mother,
Right.
and I had never noticed this before, but when that picture was up, over her right shoulder, for us looking left, is what we used to call Biscaloo's Hotel. And if you watch Perry Mason, they show that a lot. That was the county jail. Now, Sheriff Biscaloo started the Highway Patrol for California and was an incredible sheriff. He made me an honorary sheriff when I was 14 of Los Angeles, and my brother too when he was born. He was an incredible man, good friend of the families. You have a picture in there with Governor Brown that has my mom with Bud Abbott and Eugene Biscaloo's, and that was what they referred to as Biscaloo's Hotel.
Wow. Well, thank you. Well, I'll tell you what, I have got you very kindly forwarded a number of photographs to me, and I want to go through this. And ladies and gentlemen, very kindly, when you very kindly get around to watching this, the key thing is this, is that we are going through history and explaining culture and explaining, I grew up with John Wayne films. I grew up with John Wayne films directed by Ford, etc. But it's this whole thing of American culture. And we just want to go through some of that, but I want to go through it through the eyes of JP's experience, which is immense, and it is a real joy. So let's start with some photos.
My godfather,
Right.
Okay. Right. I'm trying to think of that movie, Riders of the Lost Ark.
Right.
The star of that movie, he taught how to use a bullwhip.
So he taught Harrison Ford, yes?
Harrison Ford, right.
Right, okay. Brilliant. Let's move on to the next one here. It's slightly different, so they're slightly out of order.
Oh, this is my godmother with Charles Boyer, and she was a movie star back in the 30s and 40s. She actually was in the world's first soap opera, and it was on radio, and it was called One Man's Family, and it was a household word for 30 years. And of course, now today, you'd be hard pressed to find anybody who knows what it is, which I wish the current stars of Hollywood would realize that their fame is going to be short-lived, and they're really impressed with themselves, but it's a short time fame. It doesn't last long. The only fame that's worth knowing about is Jesus.
Amen, brother. So JP, that's another good immediate statement to say. You've just defined fame, haven't you? You've just defined fame in your terms. So it seems that, and you just said it, that word has, in many ways, has gone off the rails, hasn't it? People have put a value on it that they shouldn't put a value on it? What, again, expand on that. That'd be great. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, in Hollywood, a lot of times the casting people will use the people that want to make film, do television, record. And sadly, in today's sexually charged society, although this has gone back probably from almost the beginning of Hollywood, but they force these people into having unkosher relationships with them to get apart or to move up a little bit. And a man with a man or a woman with a woman, it's a real mess. Well, that's a story I won't tell because I don't like gossip. And even if I know a lot of things on a lot of people, but I haven't even told my wife or daughter because I think some things it doesn't do any good to talk about. But there's a lot of stuff that goes on. And this is true of any industry.
Absolutely.
Any industry. You know, it's just because Hollywood tends to be a little bit more glamorous. People notice it more. But fame is temporary. Fleeting.
Sorry, I do apologize. I'll just say in these photographs, how old are you in those?
I'm 8. I was on the cover of 8 magazines that were published worldwide in the free world, because at that time it was the Soviet Union. You had the iron wall, iron curtain, and so it couldn't go too far. But each one of those magazines sold over 1 million copies.
Wow!
I wish my record did.
What is your role in these magazines? What is it? Sorry, in these programs, what's your role?
Well, this is basically just covers of magazines to grab people's attention and to relate to children as well. Lash tried not to use guns. He used his whip because it was less lethal. And so it was kind of a different spin. Actually, the first movie he was in, or not the first, but one of the early ones was, and I don't remember the star's name, but he was just on the show and he gets killed in it. He played the part of the Cheyenne Kid. And the studios were just swamped with letters, not about the star, but about Uncle Ash. You know, we don't want to see him die. Bring him back, do something. So they said, hey, this guy's a star. The problem was with him is he was like Humphrey Bogart. And he even had that Humphrey Bogart sound and look, and he was not the typical Western character. And so he couldn't go into regular movies because they had a Humphrey Bogart. So that the Westerns were a perfect venue for him. It worked real well for him, and I'm very proud of him.
How many Westerns did he make?
I don't know. There was a TV series for a while that they aired on, I think it was CBS on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And my dad called up one of the other major networks and said, I can get you this for Tuesday and Thursday so you can pull that audience back over to you. And they did. So he was on two national networks competing at the same every other day in the United States. It was pretty neat.
Wow. Well, to be on a program 3 nights a week in America, that was quite a big thing. Without being rude, what year are we talking about, sir? What year?
It was in the 50s.
Right.
I couldn't give you specific nail down on that, but I'd say maybe the early 50s, middle 50s. Most of the stuff that I was involved in was that time and back, as far as a child, laughingly referred to as a child star. Then I went into music and still did television. As a matter of fact, you're talking about Western stars besides Uncle Ash. I did a show with Annette Funicello called An Evening at the Inn, and one of the cameo shots in it was Gene Autry.
Right. Could you? I do apologize. I'm not aware of who that is. I'm just going to put my hands up, and I feel as though I should do. So could you kindly explain who that is? And you're about to explain some huge star.
This is perfect because I'm 6 years older than your king, so naturally I go back a lot further than you do. Although we're buddies, we're friends, and we share. There goes my voice. We share a lot in common. Let me see if I can just rest here for a second. I've been under a lot of attack lately, and I think whenever you do work for God,
Amen.
You have to anticipate these things happening. Be that as it may, Gene Autry was the first singing cowboy. And he, Pat Buttram was his sidekick, who was on Green Acres.
Right.
And so, but he also owned Channel 5 in Hollywood. And he invested his money. Most of the stars don't. But he was smart. He was wise. As a matter of fact, I went to school with his niece. She was a very pretty girl, and she was in my radio speech class. And at the time at Van Nuys High School, we had Stacy Keach and several of the Mouseketeers. And Marilyn Monroe actually went there, not when I went there, but she went there. Oh, when I went there was, Don Drysdale went there. He was a pitcher. Right. But I'm trying to think of the name of this particular guy. He was in All the Women Love Him, so I can't remember him. And that's a good sign. Anyway, we'll move along. Like I say, I'm 6 years older than your king. I have my Biden moments.
Right. You have you are doing brilliantly. I love it because Stacy Keach, of course. I know that name, but it's this whole thing of history, and when someone says I knew them, I was at school with them, etc., etc. But wisely, you've already defined fame. But we're talking about this history. But as you've said, with Gene then investing his money where a lot of other people may not. So that an interest, a very important tale in itself. So let's just move on, because this is another very, very important person to you.
Yes, that's my father.
Right.
Television's Jimmy Jackson, and he was on radio there on Warner Brothers, KFWB. And Neil Reagan on the left there was his announcer, and Hal Smith on the right was his announcer. And Hal was Otis, the drunk, on the Andy Griffith Show, Andy Mayberry. And I did a show with him. It's called Adventures in Odyssey. It was a radio show for children produced by Focus on the Family, which is a big Christian ministry. And when I came in and saw him, he says, "Oh, JP, I haven't seen you in a while." And I said, I know it's been a while. I said, "How you doing?" He says, "I'm fine." He says, "Tell me, is your dad?" And I said, "Oh, Dad's fine. He's fine. Yeah, he's alive. He's fine." He said, "Oh, that's good. Tell him I said hi." The sad thing is, 6 months later, he died.
Right.
So that was, but at least I got to see him and do a show with him.
No, not at all. You take your time, sir. If you need to reach for a drink or something, then please do. Let's go through. Here's another one.
Annette Funicello and me. I grew up with her in the sense that our families were friends before we were born. And Wink Martindale, who was a big star out here at one time, his wife Sandy was in a lot of Elvis's movies, and she was her dad was Annette's godfather. So I imagine her mother was Annette's godmother too. And back in those days, Hollywood was pretty tight. I remember, you remember the movie, the TV series Dallas?
Yes.
Okay, Jim Davis was the big star of that. He died doing that show, and he used to come over to our house all the time.
Right.
And he was a real manly persona too. I'm going to have to. Hey, wouldn't this be something to watch me expire? Oh, well, that's what happens to hams, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No. So when when you were saying that Hollywood is tight, you mean that everyone knew each other? Was everyone knowing each other? Everyone looking out for each other?
Yeah, I don't necessarily they were looking out for each other because competition is competition.
Yeah.
But a lot of them were good. We used to have people come over to our house and play tennis, like Donald O'Connor and people like that, and that's one of the things my dad built when he built our home was a tennis court in the back, and that was nice, and it was lit for night, and a lot of people would come over and just relax and enjoy. And that was a nice thing. But now I never realized these people were special. And my parents would never let me think I was special because it was an industry. Everybody works in an industry. Some you're on stage, some you're building a house, some you're a teacher, just different things. And so we were all equal. And my father would never let anybody think they were better than the other. So I didn't know these people were famous. I mean, Uncle Bud growing up was Uncle Bud, and Audie Murphy was Uncle Audie. And when I'd run away from home, I'd go to Audie Murphy's house. And Pam Murphy would take me in and fix me something to eat, and I'd spend the night. And then we might go into Hollywood at the Broadway, and she'd pick me up a shirt or something and then take me home. But I knew I was always safe at the Murphy house. And, kids run away for different reasons. They just silly things. But I really loved him. And as a matter of fact, Audie Murphy, for those of you who don't know, because a lot of people don't know now, and they're not teaching it in school on this side of the pond, was the most decorated hero of World War II. And he did a lot of movies with Universal and was very well cover of Life magazine. And, he was just really, really big. And, but he was humble and just the sweetest guy, just the sweetest. So my mother was talking to him I think it was, I want to say 71. I don't remember. It was a big earthquake in California. And the first death reported was this truck that went under the freeway that collapsed on the truck. And you could only see the man's arm with the watch on it, which showed the time that the earthquake happened.
Wow. And
my mother prayed for him and his family for about a week before the police came to the door and told her that was her husband.
Wow.
And she thought he got over to another part of Los Angeles County. It's a big county. And so there's a lot of valleys. And she thought he got over to the valley he was supposed to, and that he just couldn't get back because it was horrible. That was a terrible earthquake. Anyway, she's talking to Uncle Audie that same year around the time of her birthday. And Audie says, I've got to go, Nita. He says, I'm going to call you as soon as we touch down because I have some things I want to discuss with you. And she said, okay. And his plane crashed.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So she lost her husband and one of her dearest friends. Audie was like a brother to her.
Yeah.
And that was rough on her. I was on tour, so I was not quite where I should be with her, but I was out on tour and nothing I could do. I was thousands of miles away. But anyway, that's just a little side vignette. I'd like to speak something about politics right now because there's so much happening. No, we're really in the end times, I believe. That show you were on where they showed the clips of the one Muslim canceling out Israel, and then God canceled him out. And then we went to Pakistan, and he said, let the floor fall out from under me if I'm lying. And it went and took about 50 people with him.
Yeah.
And I thought, why didn't God do that to Muhammad? Because, and for those of you who don't understand the difference between Islam and Christianity and Judaism, Muhammad was speaking for what he believed was Allah. Now, when he first had this encounter, he thought it was a demon or he was crazy, but his first wife said, no, you go with it. It's probably God. And so he started this new religion where Allah, and that doesn't mean God, that's a name, that's a theophoric name. Theophoric means like Godfrey.
Right.
That's a theaphoric name because it contains God, or the word for God. Anyway, Allah supposedly did the first 5 books of the Bible and gave the gospel to Jesus. Now, the gospel is not something to be given to someone because it's the story of someone. Gospel means good news, and it was the good news of Jesus. And there's 4 of them, not 1. But God did not take Muhammad out. He allowed him to go on. And there's been a lot of horrific things back and forth between Muslims and Christendom. But now we're starting to see things happen. And now Israel's back in the land. And on replacement theology, which I wrote on, in all fairness to the church, if God says something, he's got to mean it. And if it's can't be proven, makes him a liar, then he's not God. And you know, why are we wasting our time with this religion? So they had to come out with something saying, well, the Jews killed Jesus. Therefore, God is done with them, and the church has replaced Israel. And whenever you hear Jerusalem, that means heaven. And whenever you see Israel in the last days, that means the church. And I even had a professor in high school say, you know, the people back in the Holy Land now, that had nothing to do with God. And you'll find a lot of rabbis will say the same thing. And yet in Isaiah 37, God says, I'm bringing you back into my land, into your land that I gave you. Not because of anything you've done. You've blasphemed my name throughout the nations. Now, how do you blaspheme God's name? Well, you do everything that he says is wrong. And you do that if you don't believe in him. He says, I'm bringing you back in your land, not because of you, but because of my holy name. I'm bringing you back in disbelief because of my holy name. Then in 38, he says, I'm bringing back, he said, pick up 2 sticks and hold them. He said, the 2 sticks are Israel and Judea. I'm bringing you back as one, never to be divided again. And he said that he was even going to establish the throne of David. Now, right now, they're trying to find DNA on David so they can they want to establish the throne. And this is all end times prophecy. Now, this is Jews not reading the New Testament and trying to fit New Testament into their theology. This is what God promised them. And we have to stand back and say, God is consistent. He is the God of the New Testament. As a matter of fact, I've had some Jewish friends say, God never said he was going to give us a New Testament. Mm. But in Jeremiah 31, verse 31, he says, I'm going to give you a New Testament. Mm. So these things we have to be aware of. So I think that because we're in the last days, that's why he's not letting people blaspheme and come against Israel like he did 2,000, well, it wasn't 2,000, but 1,300 years ago. But we're seeing that happen.
I couldn't agree with you more. And the other thing is, and it's not necessarily going back to beginning our discussion in Hollywood, but the importance of, as we see the media and how things are manipulated, but also as we reference off camera, if we go back to the Hollywood and what you would then define as the golden age, and we look at Cecil B. DeMille's films and the stories that he was telling, and they come from the Old Testament.
That's right. Well, there's no better stories than what God has given us, and that's history. That's history. And America was a better place in many ways back then. We had our faults. We still were working through, in the South, segregation, which was the Democrat Party, who most of the blacks have stayed with their old masters. And it's kind of strange because the first Republican black office holders in the South were Republican because it was the Republican Party that freed them. They freed the slaves. But getting back to Hollywood, I must say this. When I was doing Mom Pa Kettle back on the farm, 1950.
I'm just going to bring these pictures up right now because you've mentioned that.
Yeah.
This will.
Yeah. Now, Richard Long did Nanny and the Professor, and he was on Big Valley as the regular, one of the brothers on Big Valley. Marjorie Main's done so many movies, and Percy Kilbride himself, and that's me sitting there with them. And that was a fun series anyway. But what I noticed at the studios back then, I'm giving Paul a hot foot. That's a match in my hand, and
right.
He doesn't know it, but he will pretty soon, and then I'll go spinning across the room. Anyway, the executives at Universal were wearing lapel pins that were sickles and hammer. So the communists were already making a push. And I've noticed today.
What year was this? What year was this?
1950.
Right.
1950. Now that's just a little time after World War II ended in 45.
So the execs were wearing little hammer and sickle communist Russian badges.
Mm-hmm. So the seeds were planted. You see, they go in if you study Marxism, you notice that they take over the schools, education, and we see that now. They take over communication. I mean, with the exception of just a few networks here, new networks, most of the major old networks that we all loved and trusted, they're pretty much Pravda, which was the Soviet Union's news outlet, and it's sad because, but they're the kids are not being taught. Like I said, they don't know who Audie Murphy is, most decorated soldier of World War II, and because of that, if you don't know your past, you're condemned maybe to relive it. And that's the direction we're going, sadly.
Absolutely. And saying that, because I want to, in many ways, we will come back to this, but this is really, really important. I mean, I love history, and I love it because you quite point out, we've suddenly, for me, for a number of us, we're suddenly investigating Stalin, investigating communism, going to Karl Marx for fairly obvious reasons, because we see this march through all the institutions on your side of the pond and on our side of the pond. And then with the anti-Semitism that we are just seeing on the streets, we are seeing the combination of Islam with the left and the radical left. And that is in many ways is a conversation that we need to in itself. I would like, because we've had this conversation, we have actually met everybody. I'd just like to say that we met a number of years ago, but in conversations that JP and I have had, because of the history of JP's life, which is still ongoing. Amen. He still has a lot to do. So we just speak over that over that, because it's important. It's important for us. What could you tell me? So at the Second World War, you've just named the actor that made a big contribution there, and there are others. And I'm just trying to think. The famous Hollywood actor, whether it's someone Stewart, I've forgotten who.
Oh yeah, Jimmy Stewart.
Yeah, and then of course,
he was a lieutenant, I believe, in the
right. Then of course, the famous actor that was in Gone with the Wind, who then whose name I've also forgotten. Sorry, we'll come to that in a minute. And he then fought. He joined up as well. So there was a couple of people that were really saying, no, I'm going to leave my career, and I'm going to go into the army.
Well, let me insert this real quick. Even in the 50s, we had somebody, and the 50s were changing, but we had Elvis Presley do the same thing.
No, absolutely. So what was you knew Abbott and Costello, right? Abbott and Costello, and I remember growing up, their work was shown over here. enjoyed their work immensely, as I did with Laurel and Hardy, and one,
Yeah, I love them.
and but for very for very different reasons in many ways, and certain slapstick clever when houses would collapse around them and all this kind of thing. Very absolutely unique. But how did you know Abbott and Costello?
Well, my mother and father pioneered radio, and then they pioneered television. And I guess you could say I did too, because I started on radio when I was 3, and I did Art Linkletter Kid Say the Darndest Things when I was 5. And
Right.
I was on my mother and father's television show for 4 or 5 years. And it was in the early 50s, called Memory Lane, Hollywood's Memory Lane. And my mother was television's Hollywood hostess. And she would interview stars from all over because she knew them all. And, just being there and being on television and radio, you go to restaurants, you meet people, and you say, oh, yeah, I heard your show. And you introduce each other and you become friends. And so she, as a matter of fact, talking about Uncle Bud, this just flashed on me. In our home, our first Christmas, I went and wanted to have a live tree because I didn't want a tree that was going to die to celebrate the birth of Christ. So my dad and mom and I went out and I looked for the ugliest live tree I could find. Now, this is before Charlie Brown and his tree, a long time before. I think it was 1940, might have been 46 or 48, somewhere in there. Anyway, got the tree. Well, when the tree got to be a certain height, the big star we had on it, which was about 1.5 feet, was too small. Well, Uncle Bud, about that time, had lost his house thanks to the government. And I'm going to talk about that too in a minute. He had a tree that he always had decorated and had a huge star. So he gave it to us. And our tree out in front of the house then had Bud Abbott's star on that tree. And of course, nobody knew it was Bud Abbott's, but it's just things like that. You helped each other. Audie Murphy, who I was telling you about, World War II's most decorated hero, he, in Pam one Christmas, gave my dad an electric blanket. And they had just come out recently, so that was kind of a special thing. And Bud Abbott gave my dad gold cufflinks with 2 gold coins, 2 $5 gold pieces in them. I still have them. As a matter of fact, let me see. I just might have it here while we're talking.
Just while we're thinking, and I've looked it up, everybody, while we're up there, while I disappeared because I was extremely embarrassed about it. But the actor in Gone with the Wind, of course, is Clark Gable. Clark Gable joined the American Army. He joined up. But I love this discussion of history. And then while we're saying, so at the moment, JP is trying to find some cufflinks, and this would be great.
They may not be here. I just thought this might have been a place where I would have put them. Yeah. And got all kinds of junk. That's what happens. You collect stuff. Well, sadly, I don't know where they are.
But just describe them. Describe them to me, sir. What would they have looked? What do they look like? What was on them?
Well, it's a little bigger than a dime. Is a $5 gold piece, and I think they sell now for around I don't know, $800 each. And then the cufflink itself was gold, and so probably back then that would have been like, in today's money, something it'd probably be like about a $3,000 to $5,000 gift.
Wow.
And so but because it's from Bud Abbott, it's, to me, it's priceless. I mean,
absolutely.
Having the documentation, because in those days you didn't think of documenting everything a friend or somebody gave you, but you look back 70 years later and you think, maybe, but you just weren't impressed back then with stuff like that. You really weren't. It was just
You made a reference. You made a reference to Bud losing his house.
yes.
Do you want to take us down that line? Because this ties up when I've just mentioned Clark Gable. I forgot. How could I forget the hymn out of Gone with the Wind? And then we're talking about the Second World War and the sacrifices that other actors then made. So what was Abbott and Costello's contribution in regard to the Second World War, and where did that end up leading?
Well, Bud and Lou were the world's highest paid performers. They were making millions. Now, that's hard to do. Why is that hard to do? Because out of every dollar they made, they got to keep a dime. 90 cents went to the government.
Wow.
That's socialism.
Yeah. And
out of that, they out of that little dime, they tried to get discounts. Not discounts, but you're able to write some things off. Uncle Bud had a black gentleman, Smallwood was his name, and Smallwood was married and had a bunch of kids, and he was Uncle Bud's chauffeur. Now, Bud was an epileptic, so he didn't want to drive. And so Smallwood would drive him, and so he tried to write that off. And the tax man says, "Oh, you can't write this off." He says, "No, you don't need a chauffeur. And your shoes were Florisheim. You don't need Florisheim shoes." Of course, I've had cheap shoes and expensive shoes. I think, depending on where you are economically, back and forth. And entertainment, by the way, you can be rich one day. We call it feast or feathers. And you have your feather periods too, where you're struggling, and then something comes along, and it's not like steady work. But anyway, they tried to deny him all these write-offs. And one example of one thing that they did that the government wouldn't let them write off, we have a place called Watts in Los Angeles.
Right.
And there were the Watts riots, which were really kind of the first beginning of riots in the country. It might have been the second or third major riot where you burned down the town and businesses left, and they still have not gone back in. But Bud and Lou went in and they built this huge facility for sports. It was just incredible. And he had eye doctors, and I think they might have even had a dentist. And it was free for the kids of Watts. And this is all inner city. These are black kids. And they wanted to help them. And they weren't going to make any money off of it. But the government, I think it might have cost them back then $1 million, which would be a lot today. And they wouldn't let them write it off. Excuse me. So I remember in the theaters, they were running little spots in between the movies, asking for just $1 donation. If everybody could just send in $1 to save it. And of course they couldn't. And they had to leave it, let it go. And just a few years later, then they had the Watts riots. And that tells you, people try to help and do something right, and the government gets in there and messes it up. And the black kids were just as worthy as the so-called white kids. Now, I don't like the term black and white kids. I used to spend all summer at the beach, because I'm a Californian, to get black. So I have no problem with color being dark brown but we are one race, the human race. And the problem is everybody bases races. There's the Negro race, there's the Caucasian race, there's the Oriental race. According to the Bible, of course, it's not true. We all came from Adam and Eve. But this guy came out named Darwin, and he had a theory, and they're teaching it like fact even today. And it's been 150 years, and they still can't prove it. But that's where we are. And so we're pitting, and that's what the Marxists do. That's what the communists do. You find a group, rich against poor, Catholic against Protestant, Jew against Christian, whatever you can find that's different, pit them against each other. And we're seeing a lot of that in our country today. And anyway, so getting back to the story, So Bud and Lou tried to do a lot of good things with their money when they only made a dime on every dollar they earned. And well, one of the things they did during the war was they took about I think probably about $1 million, and they got a train, because that was the mode of transportation then. They got a big train, and they got their friends who were celebrities to come with them and go across the country, and people would come up, they'd see them and donate money for the war effort. And because of that, Congress had a special meeting and had $2 silver. One struck with Bud's relief, one struck with Lou's relief. Silver dollar. I mean, I've got silver dollar here with Eisenhower's profile or Kennedy, but two individuals like that. And so the guy looked at it when they threw the IRS guy, when they threw the money down on the table, their last $2, one with the relief of each of them on it. And he says, well, I can't take this. And he said, you might as well. You've taken everything else.
So you've just mentioned the IRS. So sadly, they were trying to do a heck of a lot of good, and also you are allowed to do write-offs. But what were the IRS? This meeting that the IRS had, what was that for? Just overseeing their final downfall? Then was
yeah. Well, there was Bud had a manager, and I don't remember his name now, but he became a city councilman, and he turned Bud and Lou. He controlled their finances, and he turned Bud and Lou into the IRS, and said, "This is money you need to look at that should go to the government," and it didn't. And because of that, if they could prove that, he got half, tax-free. That's still a law today. So they were doing this in-depth, tearing down everything they could. And Bud lost his big home. Lou lost his nice home. And my dad released that, was the one that released it to the newspapers that they were going bankrupt.
Wow. Has there been, I should think it has, but it fascinates me. Has this all been documented? Has this been made a film about? Has there been a television series about this?
No, it's not a popular subject. Remember, when you're making 90 cents, they would have to expose that. And they're talking about that in Congress now. A couple of individuals have suggested, maybe we should tax 90% of the rich, because they were rich. But here's something that most people don't think about, because most people don't know how to think. I'm not saying they're stupid. I'm saying in school, you're supposed to teach people how to think and how not to accept just everything and how to research it and check it out, which is another thing. As a researcher, a PhD, I've noticed things that you could find that were factual history 20 years ago on the internet, and you can't find it today. It's erased and replaced with something else that's entirely different of what really happened. And so you've got to be, and now with AI,
yes,
artificial intelligence, it's kind of scary. But I think we are in the last days. And another reason for that, and by the way, nobody's made TV or movies on loan from God. That's what Rush said. And my talent, my singing voice is gone. And I made a lot of money with my singing voice. But that was something God loaned me for a while. And maybe the same as with my speaking voice. And that's fine. It's his anyway. But
I hear you very loudly on that, because I think the reason why I asked about, with Abbott and Costello, with Bud and Lou, with that history, because it is a very, 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 very important history, because people might think, oh, during the war at that time, there's all these stars. What were they doing? And we're talking about people that they hired a train, for crying out loud, to go across America. So let's just put it in context for people in regard to geography. And I constantly say this. So jolly old UK fits into Texas 2.5 times. That's just one state of Texas, which is enormous. Other states, California, of course, enormous. Then you're going up to Oregon, Oklahoma, North Dakota, enormous. Now, the population of America legally is about 320 million. It may be far more than that with what's going on the Texas border, and I'm not sure of what the population would have been in the Second World War, but we are
About a
talking
million and a half.
right. So
Million
we
and
are talking right. So we are talking about huge geographical. You are a continent.
Oh,
So we
yeah.
say,
Yes.
Russia's the biggest landmass. Then it'll go to Canada. Then you're up there. Now, so traveling, if there's a rate on, if there's for me to get over to Texas, you're talking 9 hour flight. It's these vast differences. So they actually hired this train themselves, and that was their contribution to raising money for the war effort. And
Yeah, they
then
raised millions.
right,
Millions.
right. So the money that was raised, was that then to, what did the government do that with that? Were they then building munitions? Were they building planes, or were they supporting the troops on the ground?
I imagine it went into the pot and was used wherever it was needed in that respect. I don't know. I don't think the government ever tells us really where each dollar is going. They just take it and they say, "See what we're doing," and of course we won the war, and but it was a group effort. England was very important in that war, as was the other countries.
Thank you for saying that.
Well, England,
No,
England has always been. I mean, we came out of England, the United States, and there's always been a special. After the war was over, and then of course we had the War of 1812. But after that was over, there's always been a bond, and that's why some of the congressmen, like Ted Kennedy, wanted to stop bringing people from Europe into the United States and started looking to other areas to bring other people in so that it would water down the European influence and religion. And it's done, I don't care I've always said, as far as the color people, they say, well, you don't want brown people coming in. And I already explained how I was brown part of the year. But of course, I was born in Hollywood and raised in Los Angeles. And so to me, the differences in people were like a garden. Roses are beautiful, but just nothing but roses would get old. And you have different backgrounds and stuff. It's like a beautiful garden with different sizes, shapes, and colors of flowers. It's even more beautiful. And that's how I look at the human condition.
No, thank you for that, JP, because that is just a wonderful analogy at that point. And we're going to we'll end our discussion shortly, but we are going to continue our discussion, because in many ways, it'd be lovely just to go back to the golden age of Hollywood again. But the fact is, then you explaining through your eyes the influence of it. We all know that. You were talking about the television series Dallas. That was a huge show over here with the Ewings and all the rest, and who shot who and all the rest. And it was huge. And the fact that, and as a bygone age, I'm not far from where I'm sitting here. I will grab it, growing up with this TV series, of Starsky and Hutch, for argument's sake, growing up with the Dukes of Hazzard. There are other TV series, people of my humble age, where, the influence of American culture, good and bad, but it is fascinating, and in many ways we then can lament and think, what has happened? We remember television series like The Streets of San Francisco and all the rest, and the films like The French Connection, etc., things, and of course that beginning a certain cultural change and reflecting on that. When you're talking about the Watts riots and talking about that in regard to Abbott and Costello. That's a story I don't know. It's a story I want to know more about, and in many ways it's a story that I think should actually be told, because it is another side of Hollywood and people taking what they were rewarded with seriously and wanting to plow that back into society, and that is to be lauded, isn't it? Because they've gone out there, earned money, and it's what they want to then do with that for good.
Yeah, they people back then were different. Also, back then, what a lot of people don't realize, and now I'm talking under the First Amendment here, the Constitution, they had censors. Catholic Church had a censor, and the Protestants had a censor. And as a matter of fact, I had a first cousin who was like an aunt to me in Memphis. She was on the city's council to censor movies. And I remember that Peyton Place, the book, was banned in Boston because it was censored. And so in those days, the idea was morality, but we also still had Bibles in the school. And everybody hates the Bible in school. We don't want that. So we've replaced it with pornography now for first graders in kindergarten.
Absolutely.
Filthy stuff they can't show on TV to discuss what they're complaining about, because we just can't show this. But the kids can have it.
But also at that time there was the, that whole thing of the morality law and how you would depict married couples in bed and all this kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, the thing is, morality was right. It was a basic understanding, because they knew how powerful video is. And my mother and dad, they did a show that they put them on in between the ball games. And my mother wore shorts and a t-shirt. She was built very well, but I mean, it wasn't vulgar or anything. And boy, they pulled her off fast. And she looked like every other woman that was sitting in the bleachers. And the thing, here's something else. My dad managed the Amos and Andy cast. Now, Amos and Andy was it was like the Beverly Hillbillies, only black.
Right.
And you had smart, dumb, kind of middle of the road. Andy was kind of middle of the road, but he was a little gullible. Amos, who drove the taxi cab, was pretty smart. But they also had judges and police officers that were black in it that were pretty good. And now this is back in the 50s. Now the original radio show people were white, because they on radio you get away with murder. But that was their concept, and it was a fun show. But it was no different than the Beverly Hillbillies. I mean, it didn't.
You're right.
I mean, it was just fun and wholesome. Well, they used to come over to our house all the time. They meaning the cast. But Amos and Andy, Spencer Williams, and Alvin Childress would come over regularly. Excuse me, folks. I'm taking old age poetic.
Wait, I tell you what, JP. I'm going to end this because I'm going to save your voice. But I want us to do this again and again, but depending on your voice, because we're going to lead in through this history, because something that's important to me, you've talked about in the 50s when there's the hammer and sickle badge on the execs. And then when we go through that, we want to discuss the McCarthy era, because it's profound. And absolutely, and the influence on that. JP, I am going to thank you for joining me, because it's been really amazing, and just thank you for just your time, and but basically for the history that you bring to all of us in regard to, I think, a very, very fascinating piece of Americana, which I will say. So I just thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to play us out. But thank you, sir, indeed. All right.